All right. Thank you, Joe Cohen, for coming on the podcast.
Hey, great to be here, David.
Would you be so kind and tell us a bit about yourself, your history, and what you do?
Sure. So I grew up with a lot of health issues and cognitive issues, brain fog, mood problems, fatigue, you know, gut problems, inflammation, sleep. Pretty much quite a long laundry list of symptoms that I had, but I did not have any diagnosable disease outside of things that were just like maybe IBS or something, but maybe vague conditions, anxiety maybe or something like that, but nothing really serious. And then so as time went on, I had worse and worse issues, and I went to doctors and tried to get some help and wasn't able to get that help in either the conventional or the alternative space. And so I just started doing some of my own self-hacking and research, and I was able to figure out the issues and I was able to cure myself with the help of genetics and lab testing.
Right. And would you mind sharing with us how did you start this journey? When you had realized that the alternative health space nor the scientific or the classical medicine, let's say,
Sure.
field couldn't help you with your problems, what did you do then? Like initially, the first thing you did?
So I did a lot of research in the beginning. I wanted to, try to see. I did a lot of research on how the body works because I felt like I had to understand the body. And I also did research on genetics and what my lab tests meant. I looked closer at what was not optimal because when I went to the doctor, they took labs and they just said everything's good. It's all fine, whatever. But I realized that I need to look closer at my labs. I need to look at my genetics because I knew that there were some genetic components. And I also realized that these things were going to help me determine a better approach, a more targeted approach to fixing my health issues. And so it was kind of an evolution, but the first part of the evolution was that I realized that doctors were not going to help me. And I realized that I realized that I probably did not have any serious diagnosable disease, even though I had a lot of symptoms that were causing me problems in life, but they didn't rise to the level of a diagnosable disease. And for me, they were debilitating. And so I really had to solve these problems. I realized that the most important thing in life is your health, because everything comes forth from your health. If you're not healthy, then you really don't have anything else. And so that was the first thing. Once I realized that these issues were getting worse, then I realized that this is a serious problem. It's not just something that, is in my head or anything like that. Or it's just normal. Some people who grow up with issues think, okay, yeah, brain fog is normal. The issues that they had, they always known about, and that's just who they think they are. And I realized that it's very hard to put yourself in other people's consciousness and see how they experience the world. But for me, I realized that it was, there was something wrong, and I needed to fix it. So that, yeah.
Yeah, so that led you to self-hacking, essentially.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I initially created that domain in probably, it was 2011, I think. And then I started it as a personal blog in 2013, not really paying that much attention to it, but just kind of, I didn't treat it as a website or anything, just like a very personal blog about my experiments and whatnot. And then it morphed into, an educational resource on topics that I felt were very important and that needed to be needed digger deeping needed deeper digging than what was out there, the content that was out there. And so our content is very known for, diving deep into supplements, and a lot of every topic that we talk about is going to be the most comprehensive post out there on the topic, the most scientifically researched and thorough post out there on the topic.
Considering that classical medicine, as I labeled it earlier, does tend to use science for its approaches to helping people with their problems, health problems. Why do you think that you guys at SelfHacked have the highest quality content that there is for science-based self-hacking?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think a lot of it has to do with the founder, and I think when it comes to, forming a company, I think a lot of it has to do with the team, the processes, the leadership, and the team are the people actually writing the content. You can't if you don't have a good team, then you really cannot do anything. You can't create good stuff or great stuff. So I really think it's the team in combination with leadership, and a vision, and a lot of hard work. I think that's the formula for what we did. Now, I didn't always have a great team, and I would say even there were some, if I'm going to be honest, I'd say that not everything did I have the best leadership or vision from the get-go. I did make some mistakes. And so as an example, let's say the team that we had, that when I initially started hiring people, I realized we had like a lot of posts that were being created, and I realized that this, creating the kinds of posts that I wanted was not an easy thing. And the vast majority of people who were applying were not cut out for it. So some of the early posts that weren't some of the posts that I wrote, a lot of those were focused on like a personal kind of aspect. They were kind of, my opinions, and then I introduced some science to it to back it up, but they weren't as rigorous as, or objective as the team, when the team writes articles, just because when I'm writing them, they're more opinion pieces. And I'm putting pieces of the puzzle together. It's much more of an opinion piece with science added rather than very objective science and whatnot. But in any case, a lot of the early articles we had, there were some issues with the quality of the content, but then I realized I really focused on hiring good people, and we got rid of all those the initial writers, and the quality of the content started to go up dramatically. And and then I would say there were some, there were some, in terms of my part, there were some I didn't really fully understand how people look at the content, how they would perceive certain kinds of content. It was kind of like, what kind of content would I be interested in? And what it turns out is that a lot of people, if they see like 18 benefits of something, they assume that these benefits are proven, just as one example, right? Whereas I always look at things skeptically, and I say, you got to look at what's actually written, right? The title of the post is not actually it's not saying that it's proven or anything. But in any case, I think how people perceive the content was different than how I would have guessed they would have perceived it, right? I think people perceive, like, if they see something as an animal study, they think it's like proven, some people, right? But we don't. I tried to make it so that we're just, putting what the science is on the matter, and not making judgments. Like, that's how I would look at it. I would just look at what the actual evidence is for each thing I was reading. But now what we're doing is we're being more explicit, for a few reasons. One is for Google, and the other is, to make it medically acceptable to medical professionals, and also for people who are not, savvy, and even some people who are savvy, when they read it, that, if they see animal studies, it kind of discredits the post. So now we're very clear that, this is like lacking research, lacking evidence. But here's the things that have. So we fixed up around 700 posts already, and we're really categorizing things based on evidence and putting in more disclaimers, in part for Google, and also because. Just because, people misunderstand things.
Right. And all of these posts are personal opinion posts, substances posts, and
so no, what I did was I actually recently took out the personal opinion pieces, and I put them on a different website called SelfHack without the ED.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason is because Google penalizes you for those opinion pieces, essentially, right? If you're not a news site, then, if you have opinions that are not mainstream, then Google will penalize you for that. And so it's just I took off all the pieces that were not that were my opinion pieces. Some of them were opinion pieces, and we just transformed them to, just matter of fact posts. And so now, and also we're gonna transfer the content to SelfDecode. So I started the domain in 2011, and I had too many health issues at that point to continue to actually start a website or do anything, even a personal blog. And so I didn't actually do anything until 2 years later. And then I did once I fixed my issues completely. That's when I was able to start it as like an actual company. We're talking about in like 2015, and yeah, that's after like 2015, 2016. We already start to see 2016 is when non-opinion pieces started to come out, essentially, right? But in any case, the brand of SelfHacked, SelfHacked by its nature is somewhat fringe, and I think what we're doing is mainstream now, right? Some of my opinion pieces could be fringe, but the work that we're doing is mainstream. And so I think from a branding perspective, it doesn't really make sense to have a name like Hacked in there, right? That's why we're kind of we're putting everything under a central brand, like the SelfDecode brand, because I think that's really what it is, and that's a mainstream brand, right? People want to decode themselves, and
right.
I think that's really, it really describes us more. We're giving them the content and tools to do that. And it's not actually fringe, even though we're offering information that other people are not offering.
What's that?
Just going more deep into posts and offering more information, right? So yeah, I think just having a more thorough post, more studies in there. We have quite a lot of studies in each post, more than pretty much any other site. I'd say it's on average, it's more than any other site. Examine might be either less or more. I don't really know, but we try to have our stuff that's, it's more accessible than Examine stuff.
I want to learn more about how one can use his or her genetic information, SNPs, right? SNPs.
Well, now, but soon it's going to be other kinds of variants as well. But SNPs are very accessible, and they're cheap. They are historically cheap to sequence. But we're going to be going into, a whole genome era in not too distant of a future. But yeah, let's say now SNPs, they have quite a big impact in their totality. So let's say SNPs. You're asking how can someone use their genetic data, let's say, to help them, right?
Sure.
And
yeah,
for the most part, we're talking about SNPs now. There's two main ways to do that. One is if you already have a problem, a diagnosable condition, you can look at which genes are impacting that condition. And that can give you more insight about your condition, either how the condition came about or what kind of treatments would be better for it. And we're generally talking about natural treatments at this stage, and some pharma treatments as well. But what we're focusing on, let's say, is SelfDecode is more natural treatments, right? So like which kind of diet, which supplements. But there's really two stages. And right now, a minority of studies actually talk directly about how a SNP, if you do X diet, it'll directly impact this gene or whatever. It's more about you look at the genes that are not that are associated with risk for the condition that you have, and then that allows you to do more reading about that gene. So we have a lot of information on SelfDecode about each gene and how they're related to the condition. So right now we have like a personalized blog that basically does that. It takes each gene and goes into depth about each condition and how the gene relates to the condition. And then we also have reports. But essentially, and the reports kind of also do something like that. And they give you overviews of what kind of supplements maybe or diet or lifestyle stuff that you would try that might have a more targeted approach to the to the issue that someone has, right? So every issue that people have, if you have a mood issue, there could be like really 100 different types of mood issues based on what is abnormal in your neurochemistry or biochemistry, right? So you can have a mood problem that's caused by low serotonin, or you can have a mood problem that's caused by low BDNF, or you can have a mood problem that's caused by GSK3 beta, right? There's quite a lot of biochemical pathways. And so the thing is that if you already have a problem, you look at your genes and you find which genes are problematic, and they can give you insights more into your condition and what you can do about it. And the other way is if you have an undiagnosable condition and you want to find out more about, what you have and where it's originating from. For example, like my issue, we brought on I brought on a co-founder a few months ago, and he was looking at my genetics just because that's the default file on SelfDecode, and he was just saying like, I think the source of your issues historically, even though I don't have symptoms now, right? Because I was able to combat it through a bunch of different means, but he said he thinks the source is gut because he saw a lot of gut-related inflammatory genes and variants related to gut inflammation, Crohn's, colitis, things like that. Even though I didn't have Crohn's, I do have genes for it, right? And I do have gut inflammation problems when I stray from doing certain things like, dietary stuff and whatnot. And so there's a lot of pieces of evidence that say that he is right. It probably is related. Like it probably did start from the gut, and it made its way to joints and other areas Based on my symptoms, based on my genetics. So that's the second way to look at genes, is really to look at, if you don't have a diagnosable condition, it can help you see like maybe it can give you clues as to what is the problem. And you got to look at, if you're looking at it that way, you got to be smart about it. Probably if you don't know a lot, it probably helps to do it with professionals so that they can give you perspective and insights that you might not, it's easy to become scared of every variant that is associated with risk, right? You could say, oh, like people could look at it and be like, am I dying tomorrow because I have this risk? And you have to realize that everyone has risks. So professional who's looked at a lot of these things can have perspective and see, this is probably more than normal. This is less than normal. Here's what might be the case. And so that's another way to look at it. But I think the main way, and then there's a preventative way where, if you had a history of heart disease in your family, let's say somebody told me, hey, my dad died at 40 from a heart attack, whatever. That's obviously a very strong cardiovascular risk profile for that individual, right? They might not have gotten those genes, but that's something that they might be worried about. And you want to look at, so if your parents had a condition, or if you have a strong genetic predisposition for it, let's say if you have a strong predisposition for it, a family history of it, then you look at your genetics and see, what is my predisposition for that? And again, you need to look at it like, it's better if you look at it with a professional, but even if not, you could still see like healthy things that you can do to improve your cardiovascular health. That's also taking into account your genetics. So like, if in that sense, it could be good as a motivation tool as well. You can say like, exercise is going to be good for everyone who wants to improve their cardiovascular health. But if you see a direct connection between a gene and how exercise could potentially benefit that gene, then, or counteract some negative effects of that gene, then you're going to, take that more seriously. I think it's going to be more of a motivating factor. If, for example, if you have cardiovascular issue, like if you're in that situation and you notice you have a gene like NOS2 that deals with nitric oxide, or NOS3, then and that can impact your blood flow and cardiovascular health, and exercise can clearly help with that, right? So I think that's an important way to look at it also. So I'd say the three main ways is prevention, a personalized approach to undiagnosable issues, so people who are left out of the mainstream. I would say I'm one of them, right? I did not have a diagnosable issue, but genetics helped me a lot, and quite a few people are helped by that. And then I saw quite a few cases where people had a diagnosable, like they had an issue, they knew they had a clear issue. For example, my girlfriend had a clear mood issue, and she took she read our mood report, and she got completely better from it, following the recommendations. Pretty much like it was an overnight change. And so that's an example of like, she had an issue. We knew she had an issue. It actually wasn't diagnosed, but it was an issue. It was clear. And so she knew what to look at. And then she actually also had another case. She was trying to fix something else where it wasn't diagnosable. She was having energy issues and waking up tired and whatnot. And she looked at her genes, and that helped her as well. She saw some rare variants that were associated with higher testosterone, and she took her blood test, and she saw her testosterone was higher, was out of the range, and her estrogen was low, even though the doctor said it was normal, right? So that's an example of undiagnosable. So she had two cases. I had multiple undiagnosable cases where I'm looking at my genetics. Nothing, it's not diagnosed, but I'm seeing a lot of information that's really helping me in life, and getting healthier in a more targeted way. And then I've seen other people where they had a strong family history, and it's more of a motivating factor in leading them to do healthier to do healthier lifestyle choices.
Right. I think that the potential of personalized medicine is incredibly vast, but in my understanding, there is still a ton to learn about the brain and what the interventions that we expose it to, how our interventions will affect the brain. So where do you think that we are now, except for exercise, sleep, mindfulness, nutrition, and some others? Are there any supplements that can be very powerful for a specific individual based on their genetic profile?
Well, I can, in my case, I would say yes, right? I cannot say in all cases. In my case, it definitely did help me. And I think that there's multiple diets that people do well on. And I think, diet is not just one thing. Exercise is not just one thing, right? What kind of exercises? I think there's more things. There's cold therapy, there's saunas. There's quite a lot, actually. I think and also there's a lot of supplements. They all work in different ways. I mean, there's common denominators, but they do work differently. And I think, yeah, I think the problem is that there's not enough money to study supplements, right? And so that you don't have enough large clinical trials, and so you don't really have that many things that are very proven beyond something like fish oil or whatever, right? And that's just a institutional problem with, and even with diet, you don't really know. It's basically the way that medicine works is they need to prove causality, and that's kind of rooted in science as well. Where the mainstream medical bodies, if they don't have a very large evidence that there's a causal connection, they generally won't make a recommendation. I mean, there are some exceptions, for example, with diet, but they did screw up with that, right? Where medical bodies made a lot of bold recommendations, and it turned out that the evidence really isn't that great for it. So when they did do it, they screwed up, and I think they did it because that's the best that they had. But essentially, it's when we're talking about these areas like personalized medicine and these kinds of things and supplements and a lot of these things, they are preliminary, right? There's, even with the SNPs, if you actually notice how studies speak about it, they don't say increases the risk, because in medicine that actually implies that there's a causal effect. They say an association, right? So they don't know. They know that if you have this variant, that there's an association between that and there's let's say association and the odds of getting some condition go up, right? If you have that variant, that's what they know. They just don't know if it's causing that, right? And so where genetics is there's a lot of fudge. There's tons of information. It's kind of like with supplements. You have a lot of supplements out there. You don't know exactly which ones work 100% or which ones are going to work for you. They're not FDA approved, right? Because there's not enough evidence behind each supplement. And when it's the same thing with diet. There isn't 100% proof that vegetables will make you healthier, right? It's just, you look at, there's lines of evidence, but none of them are actually causal, right? It's more like there's an animal study. They might be studying specific nutrients or flavonoids in these animals. And then there's epidemiological studies, but those are association studies, right? And then they're trying to control for variables, and that makes it a bit better. But still, there's a healthy user bias in these studies, and they can look at like vitamins in the blood. Let's say if your vitamin C is higher, you're more likely to have beneficial outcomes. But then you can argue how much of that has to do with someone who has more vitamin C is probably just eating healthier, right? And so it's very hard to, when it comes to anything that's lifestyle related, it's very hard to tease apart cause and effect, right? You don't know that exercise is going to necessarily help with any condition. You really don't. You just there are no studies that are proving it. Now the thing is that so you're basically the way personalized medicine is working now is the same as the alternative medicine, if you will, or non-mainstream. Is the non-mainstream is really working in it's in a field of uncertainty. And I think that when people make, good decisions within a field of uncertainty, they can get good results. Right? So that's what I did essentially. There was no certainty with anything that I did, but I made good decisions, calculated decisions, and I got great results from it. And I think that's what all of alternative medicine is pretty much, right? It's things that are understudied, but all because something is understudied doesn't mean it's not a good decision to go ahead with it. And I would categorize, and that's why I think that a lot of genetic stuff is also, it is a space where alternative people are getting into more rather than the mainstream because of that area that is understudied, right? They tend to get into areas that are understudied, but can potentially have a good impact on people. Because, again, if it's understudied, the mainstream cannot practice it. It's just how the system works. They cannot practice medicine when there's not a clear proof of cause and effect. And yeah, and even the stuff, right? And even when they do try to get into it, it's botched, like with diet stuff, right? You don't want to, you're not going to get the best dietary advice from your doctor, for example, or I mean, some of it could be correct, but the point is that, the fact is that people do well with different diets, and we really don't understand like which, there is no understanding of like who's helped by which diet, right? So even if there's a study in, low-fat diet helps in post-menopausal women who are 59 years or older, that doesn't actually say anything that diet will help a 20-year-old male who, has low testosterone or something, right? I'm just giving a random example. And so you see that there is a flaw in the way that I mean, there's an uncharted territory. There's a large uncharted territory on the map, and alternative medicine, natural, they basically get in there and, take that role of, well, this is not proven, but we think this is a good thing to try, or, we think that this is a good risk to take, if you will. So life is all about taking smart choices, smart risks. And that's what I did. And I got a lot of help. And the people who I see doing that generally have very good results, right? But again, it's all about looking at the evidence, taking smart risks or smart choices. And I think personalized medicine with labs and genetics fits into that as well, right? You don't really have things that are proven, but if you look at the associations, you could still get a lot of information, right? But you really do have to look at it with a skeptical viewpoint. And same with supplements, same with everything, really, diet, everything, right? What diet is the healthiest? Everyone has a different idea. And the reason is because there is no one size fits all. And when you're looking at dietary research, you got to be skeptical. And just like when you're looking at supplement research, you got to be skeptical. But you also want to be open-minded because these things do have potential. So you look at the negative, potential negatives, you look at the potential positives, and everybody has to make that decision. But I'd say that labs, it's the same thing. There's an association that if you have this level of a lab, that it means this, right? Most labs don't have causal. But when I see that information, I think it's very useful. Not because I'm going to live my whole life on an association, but it's something that is a piece of the puzzle, and then when I put those pieces of the puzzle together, I can develop a framework and make better choices. So unfortunately, that's just the way things work with conventional medicine, that if it's not proven, they cannot get into it. And and the reason I get that, because when they make a recommendation, they're really making a recommendation for the whole country. And they're saying like every citizen should do this. And or if if they approve a drug, they're saying that they're giving their FDA approval. They're saying this works, right? And they don't want to do that on things that they're not sure if it works. Now, when it comes to drugs, there's also side effects and whatnot. But the point is that governments operate much more cautiously than individuals operate, right? A government might say that we're not going to approve self-driving cars, whereas if you're an individual, you might say that, look, I'm a responsible adult. I understand that. Let's say, I'll give you an example. Let's say a self-driving technology came out tomorrow, right? And let's say it was slightly less, let's say it was as safe as humans. The government would not approve of it, right? It has to be at least, let's say, 2-3 times safer than humans in order for the government to approve it as self-driving. And so if you're an individual, the government's not going to approve it. But if you're an individual, you might say that, look, I'll use it, but I'll also keep my eyes on the road, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a similar situation. Like it's just about approaching it. There's always this tug of war between, the government trying to protect people and trying to be very cautious, and individuals trying to exercise their right, their individual rights, and doing things that are better for themselves, right? And so, as an individual, you could say, I'm just going to be very careful when I drive a car. I just want to look at the data. How safe is this? But if I know that this is not that safe, I could still use it and then keep my hands on the wheel or keep my eyes on the road. It's the same thing. The supplements and the alternative space, you just have to use good judgment and realize what the situation is. Same with the personalized stuff. But there's a ton of information, and it has a lot of potential to help a lot of people, just like everything else that was not government sanctioned, right? And especially when things are new. So this whole space is extremely new, and it's very complex, and the government's going to take a really long time to catch up on it.
Right. You mentioned earlier that there are other ways of testing your genetics than SNPs. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, so there's a misconception where people think that testing your SNPs is testing your whole genome, whereas the SNPs are only less than 1% of your genome. It's 0.5%. So it's a half of 1% of your genome, something like a 23andMe kit, right? And that's very important to realize. But I mean, what they're doing, these SNPs, they're focusing on more important SNPs that are likely to be important, or and the SNPs in general are collectively they can be important. So, it's not necessarily 0.05% of importance, but it is not the whole genome, whereas some people think that it is, right? I had a friend who took it and said like, hey, wait, this is not I'm gonna have to do this again in once whole genome comes out or whatever. The answer is yes. If you want the complete data, it's not whole genome. Now, a whole genome file is 150 gigabytes, and then it can be culled down to less, but essentially the raw data of a whole genome is 150 gigabytes. And right now there's no really good ways to sequence the whole genome for cheap and also for reliable data. There's companies that do sell whole genome data now. Some of them sell for pretty cheap. Like, I bought mine for $250, but there's issues with that, and that's why I can't recommend it. Right? I bought it because I'm in the space and I just want to, like, I want to see maybe this is good. I want to recommend it, but there's issues with the company. That number one is it was taking them a really long time to sequence, and I have my own theories of why that is. But in any case, they do sell the data. They do plan on selling your data, and whole genome data is very valuable. And the other thing is, I don't think the data is that accurate in the way that they're doing it. We're still testing that out. Actually, we're gonna compare it. We're doing that right now, but there's a couple problems, and the other companies are essentially much more expensive, and so there's no. I think people are really waiting for $250 whole genome, something like that, some kind, in that price range, and for for it to be good, trustworthy company, things like that. And I don't think we have that at this stage. I think it's going to be there very soon, though.
Right. Are there any other terms that you think will become buzzwords? Like instead of SNPs, the next thing is going to be something. Is there any other category that people should know of, and is there any next thing?
There's 4 major categories of variants. There are SNPs, CNVs, copy number variation, SV, which is structural variants, and then there are indels, insertions and deletions. So, it's going to be very interesting how it shapes up, because essentially you do have a large group of people that want to take health into their own hands. And what happened is that, let's say there was an MTHFR bandwagon, and I have both variants. So I think it's useful information. But then what happens is, like, some people like turn that into a religion, right? That it's like all my health issues are from MTHFR, and that's where perspective comes into play, right? Whereas I have it, but I realize it's a piece of the puzzle. You want to see it as a piece of the puzzle, and that can help you, and you might change what you're doing because of it, but it's just a piece of the puzzle. It's not a be-all, end-all, right? And I think, and I'm seeing it with a few other genes, but essentially people like kind of latch on to one gene as the cause of their issues. And it's going to be interesting how it plays out, because, you might have other things like that. But since there's so many genes and so many variants, it's going to be hard to, I don't know how people are going to like latch onto things anymore like that. But that's why we're building like a tool that can allow people to explore the genes that are like out of all the genes, right? We have 110,000 variant SNPs in our system, not just a report of, we don't just give, here's the 20 SNPs and here's everything you need to do based on that, right? That's what a lot of companies are doing in the alternative space. And so I think that is faulty, because it's really only giving you a very limited piece of the picture, and it doesn't allow you to do things in the way that I think is best. For example, if you have a problem, then you find the variants for that problem, and those variants are probably not contained in a list of 20 SNPs, right? You really have to have a more robust system to find those variants.
Right. So the way I see it, the problem for the user is that he or she has to invest a lot of time into researching this and understanding their own health and body themselves.
At this stage, yes, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
That's the downside. It has a lot of promise. I think it has value, but it does require, it's not something where it's like a fast food. You go in, you buy it, and you know exactly what's going on. It requires it requires time, and you got to read up about it, and I mean, it's also, we do have sections where we give recommendations, but in general, I think you want to do that with either if you're not the type of person who's going to be thoughtful about it, then you should do it with a professional. For me, I'm the type of guy that I'm like, I just, I like doing these things myself, and I like figuring things out and reading. So there are some users like that, right? And then there's people who need professionals. And then, but otherwise, I think it depends what it is. But if you're looking at recommendations, otherwise, if you're not working with a professional, you could then just see recommendations and then read up on them and see if they can help you, if they can help your issue regardless of your genetics. And that's actually what we do. We don't give any recommendations in a report that wouldn't help an underlying issue, even regardless of the genetics. So we make sure that it helps. It potentially counteracts an effect of a gene, but also that it helps the underlying issue, so that if they try it and the connection with the gene wasn't the biggest factor for them, it still might help them anyway.
All right. Last question of the day, because I know you have to go. My impression of you is that your philosophy is very connected to mindfulness. You want to be present. Is that correct?
I think we all want to be present.
Mm-hmm.
I think the challenge is actually being present and how much somebody works on it. To be honest, I actually don't even work on it. But I see a value in it. I just don't put, whether it's good or not, I don't put, like, let's say, time and effort into doing that. Right? It's not necessarily good
Right.
or bad, but yeah.
I see. So the actual question then was, if this is your philosophy, why do you think that it is important to seek a good mood in other ways? Why do you think it's important to seek, let's say, stimulation? Because I've seen you do some experiments with the purpose of achieving good moods, such as buzz from apple cider vinegar, for example.
Sure.
So in my understanding, those two philosophies are sort of contradictory, that you're seeking stimulation and mindfulness, so being observing whatever may rise. What are your thoughts on that dichotomy?
I actually don't think they're contradictory.
Okay.
So, yeah, my view, I have more of a Zen view of mindfulness and the mind in general. And there's different Zen views, but the one that I'm referring to is where the individual doesn't really have control over what they want to do or not want to do. Basically, there's the ego, and there's the consciousness, and then there's the subconsciousness. And the subconscious, which, the totality of someone's biology, is what drives their decision making. The nuts and bolts, how they're designed, like how they're built. And the only real way to change your biology, like, I think that it's biologically driven. And the only way to change it is through life experiences or altering your biology. So,
Right.
and this is like this kind of idea is very. There's a lot of parables and stories in Zen about trying to demonstrate this idea, where a student goes to the master and they say, I want to be enlightened, right? Or there's yeah, I mean, there's basically, like, yeah, let's say they go to this master and say, I want to be enlightened, and the master will just hit them or something, right? And basically, you can't teach someone necessarily. The idea is that the master cannot teach them how to be enlightened, right? It's just the negative experience of asking to be enlightened and then getting some kind of shock treatment, right, makes them realize that it makes them defeated. They feel defeated, and then they automatically want to change course. So it's the experience of defeat that actually changes what the motivations of an individual. And so life experiences, sometimes good, sometimes bad, they can have a big impact on your life, right? People who have gone through war can come back with PTSD. That's a long-lasting negative experience. And then there's some positive experiences that can reward people in certain ways that change how they view the world, and that could also have an impact. But the point is that these were not conscious choices by an individual to either become depressed after they came out of war, or choose to do something in a certain way, right? There's the idea that the individual is disillusioned to think that they had the choice, because that's the way the mind works. It makes you believe. It seems there's this great ego illusion where it seems like you're having the choice to do something, whereas actually that is coming from a deeper place that your consciousness was not even aware of. So getting back to your point, I don't try to do mindfulness because I accept that I accept that when there's going to be big changes in my life, those are going to come from experiences. I try something out, and I have a life experience, and then I change as a result. And the other thing is changing my biology. So if I want to get happier, let's say, right, I think that trying to chase something, to do something to be happier, that's not going to change your biology is not going to work, right? Now, but the thing is that meditation is an experience, and so potentially it can change your biology. We know that meditation changes your biology. But so mindfulness is something that could potentially, it's a state of, I don't know how well trying to practice mindfulness will work. I've tried to practice it before. I don't think it helped me, but it could be that it helps other people. But I do know that, something like meditation is a practice, and it's an experience where you're actually shutting out your conscious mind. I mean, like, it's the dissolution of the ego and the conscious mind, and that actually brings you to a higher experience. And through that experience, you're more calm. You have more insights into, you're more perspective. It calms your nervous system. And so I think that when you say I'm into mindfulness, I actually said before the question that I'm not actually into it. I don't try to do anything to enhance it, right? But so in that case, based on that philosophy, I think that the only effective ways to change, if you want to be happier or whatever, is to change your biology. And that was true for me as well. The big changes in my life were mainly as a result of defeat. So that's an experiential change. And also from just experience in general in life, just understanding I do this and this is what happens in this situation. And then there's then there was changes in my biology, really taking, trying different things and changing my biology, and that had profound impacts. So yeah, for me, I don't like mindfulness is a good thing, let's say. For me, I don't know if I can train myself to do it. Maybe you could do meditation that will help you, become more mindful, but the act of trying to become more mindful or trying to change your psychological state in a conscious way has backfired on me, and I think that that's the case for a lot of people, right? If you try to become less anxious, you can actually become more anxious, right? It's a bit of a paradox, but that's what actually happens, right? You then become anxious about becoming anxious.
Right. Same for sleep.
Yeah, right. If you try to go to sleep,
yeah.
you're going to have more trouble going to sleep than if you just hit the pillow and just started daydreaming, right?
Right.
A lot of things in life work like that, right? If you try to do something, if you try to, if I'm like, sometimes if you're more like, if you're just more relaxed, if I'm playing volleyball and I'm more relaxed, I can do better than if I'm like maybe sometimes under pressure, right? Because you're trying more, and it could, and like trying to walk could make it more awkward to walk. It's the same thing with the mind. We try to do things with our mind that actually make it worse, and that's where Zen comes in. And I think mindfulness is a question mark for me, because people do talk about like increased mindfulness and whatnot. I haven't found it to work for me, but it's a question for me of whether that's an experience that you mainly get through meditation, or is it something that you can do. I mean, again, even when you're doing it, it's the main thing is that it's shutting out the ego part of your brain, because the ego is always trying to think about things and manipulate things and try to get you to change things, whereas when you're mindful, you're just focusing on what's happening. But on the other hand, if you're trying to be mindful, that could potentially backfire as well, right?
Well, in my understanding, mindfulness is being aware of all of these processes. And even if
But that's not something that you have to try to do, though. That just happens. If you are either you are aware of it or you're not.
Yeah, you have to sit down or schedule time or decide, yes. So try in a sense. But when you do it, it's all about not trying to do anything, just observing everything. So
Again, yeah. So there's definitely something to meditation, and I think that it's really taking advantage of the experience. You're getting into an experience, and the ego is dissolving, or it's your thinking mind is not as active, and that makes you more relaxed and gives you better perspective. I think anytime you're in a flow state, similar things happen. These are kind of experiences that can recharge people. So yeah, I think there's something to it. It's just, but again, I think I definitely don't think they're contradictory though. Trying to improve your biology, I see that actually as the same thing. If you're trying to be mindful, you're also trying to have an experience that changes your biology without trying, right? Without consciously trying. So I actually see it as the same thing.
I agree. My question was rather like that specific experiment with apple cider vinegar. I saw that you phrased it in the way which made me perceive it as you were seeking the buzz from these gummy bears. I think that it
But
was that you were thinking.
even if I was seeking a buzz,
Right. Mm-hmm.
I still wouldn't see it as people. I mean, yeah, I still wouldn't see it as contradictory to mindfulness, right? Because when you're trying to be mindful, you're also trying to get into a certain state. You're trying to get into a given state,
Right.
and
in a sense, yeah.
however you want to spin it, right? That is your goal before you get into it. You don't just get into it because of it's not a religious thing, right? You're not doing it because some religious leader told you to do it. You're doing it because you want to try to improve your biological state.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. I don't see any difference. Both of things you're trying to do it to improve your biological state. And the only way is by improving your biological state. The fact is that these things like meditation do improve your biological state by calming your whole system, by rewiring the brain essentially through these experiences that, that really it's through not trying to do anything gets you to that experience, that better experience.
Right. And I definitely do agree that hacking your biology, let's say, is a good way to engineer your experience. And some great resources for that are SelfDecode and SelfHacked. Are there any other places that we should link in the show notes to and that our listeners should be aware of?
We also have Lab Test Analyzer that analyzes the lab tests. We're actually going to be combining them pretty soon. Same, like I said, we want all of them to be under the SelfDecode brand, all the content, the lab analysis software. So that's all. But yeah, labtestanalyzer.com can help people analyze their labs, and SelfDecode is for the genetics, and that's pretty much it. If people want to learn more, they can. I have my regimen. I show how my regimen can, how I built my own regimen based on my genetics and labs. We have that on the site on SelfHacked, and people can sign up for that. I write all the emails, so that's a way to keep in touch.
Cool. We'll link to those sources in the show notes for our listeners. And thank you, Joe Cohen, for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure.